Axel von Fersen lived during the times of the Old World of the 18th century. He was noble by birth and chivalrous by nature. Destiny was less than kind to this true gentleman, whose life was affected by misfortunes and tragedy. His story started in Sweden, where Count Axel von Fersen was born in September 1755. He belonged to an aristocratic and wealthy family who had been actively involved in the political affairs of Sweden. His mother was Countess Hedwig Catherine de la Garde, and his father was Field Marshal Friedrich Axel von Fersen, who had previously lived in France and served in the French army during the reign of Louis XV. Friedrich von Fersen obtained for his son the title of lieutenant attached to a regiment in the French army, and at the age of 16 Axel was sent abroad to study at various military schools, first in Turin and later in Strasbourg. When Axel was 18, he travelled to Paris for the first time. At the end of January 1774, the Swedish count, who had been in Paris for a few weeks, was eager to attend social events that would give him the chance to see how people of the French high society spent their time. The opportunity presented itself when he was invited to a masked ball at the opera. As soon as he arrived, he noticed it was crowded, and he seemed lost in the ballroom. After a short while, he was engaged in a conversation that lasted for quite a while by a mysterious lady wearing a mask. When she removed her mask, the identity was revealed: Princess Marie Antoinette. Axel returned home and wrote to his father saying, "She talked to me a long time without my recognizing her." Axel was well received in France, and the Swedish ambassador wrote to the King of Sweden, Gustav III, to express his opinions about the young count, saying, "Of all the Swedes who have been here in my time, he is the one who has been the most welcomed by the great world. The royal family have treated him remarkably well. It is not possible to have shown a more discreet and becoming conduct than he has maintained. With the handsomest face and much intelligence, he could not fail to succeed in society, and he has done so completely." Fersen returned to Sweden at the beginning of 1775, when he was 19. He was by then a lieutenant in a regiment of the French army, and also appointed a captain of the light horse cavalry of the King of Sweden. After a short stay in London, Axel decided to go to Paris, where he arrived in the summer of 1778. At the end of August, he was presented to the royal family at Versailles. Pleased to see him again, Marie Antoinette, who had become in the meantime the Queen of France, recognized Count Fersen straight away. It was clear that the Queen had formed a favorable impression of him, and she was keen on introducing Fersen to her circle of friends. Enjoying his time in Paris, Axel wrote to his father to say, "The Queen treats me with great kindness. I often pay her my court at her card games. As someone had told her of my Swedish uniform, she expressed a wish to see me in it. I am to go Thursday thus dressed, not to court, but to the Queen's apartments. She is the most amiable princess that I know." Soon the young foreigner became the Queen's favorite, and the courtiers started talking about it. Axel was obviously touched by the attention he was receiving from the Queen, and he actually fell in love with her. It seemed that the feeling was mutual, but Axel chose to hide it from her. The Queen's attention to Fersen did not pass unnoticed, and the Swedish ambassador in France hastened to write to Gustav III saying, "The young Count Fersen has been so well received by the Queen that this has given umbrage to several persons. I own that I cannot help thinking that she had a liking for him. I have seen too many indications to doubt it." The conduct of the young Count has been admirable on this occasion for its modesty and its reserve, but above all in the decision he made to go to America. By thus departing, he avoided all dangers, but it needed evidently a firmness beyond his years to surmount that seduction. The Queen's eyes could not leave him during the last days. and they often filled with tears. Eager to take part in the American War of Independence, Fersen decided to join the war effort. At the age of 24, he was appointed aide-de-camp to General Rochambeau, who would be commanding the expeditionary regiments of the French army. During his years spent in America, Fersen proved his bravery and his sense of duty, and in October 1781 he took part in the military operations that led to the British losing the Battle of Yorktown, strengthening the cause for the American independence. After the war, he was rewarded for his bravery by George Washington, and he returned to France in 1783. Hoping to remain in the service of a regiment of the French army, Fersen spoke to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Sweden and asked him to present his wish to the king. The king approved, and Fersen was overjoyed at the news. He wrote to his sister Sophie, saying, "Indeed, I am so happy that I can hardly believe it. I have more than one reason for that. I will tell you when we meet." Gustav III wrote to Louis XVI to say how proud he was of Fersen, recommending him for the position of colonel in the French army. In September that year, King Louis appointed Fersen as colonel in charge of the Royal Swedish Regiment with its garrison at Valenciennes. Axel would be dividing his time between Sweden and France with the full support of Gustav III, who wished to maintain a strong alliance between the two countries. By that time, Axel was 28 years old. His father was urging him to get married, and he brought up the name of Mademoiselle Necker as a possible match for Axel. When he started making excuses to avoid getting married, his father found a rich English lady as a prospective wife for his son. However, Axel did whatever he could to frustrate his father's plans, and he wrote a letter to his sister saying, "I trust that no one will try to find another bride for me. I have made up my mind never to contract conjugal ties. I cannot give myself to the only woman I desire, to the only woman who really loves me. Therefore, I will give myself to no one." When the time came for him to go back to Sweden, it was clear that Fersen had his reasons for not wanting to leave Paris, saying in a letter to Sophie, "In spite of all the pleasure of seeing you again, I cannot leave Paris without regret. You will think it quite natural when you learn the cause of this regret, and I will tell you, for from you I will have no secrets." In the meantime, Axel accompanied Gustav III to Germany and Italy for 8 months, and then he went back to France, where the King of Sweden and Axel were warmly welcomed by King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette at Versailles. Axel did return, however, to Sweden at the end of 1784 to see his family, and he told Sophie the secret he had kept for so long. When he returned to Paris in a few months' time, he wrote to his sister saying, "I begin to be a little happier, for from time to time I see my friend freely in her own apartments, and that somewhat consoles us for all the trials she is enduring. Poor woman, she is an angel of goodness, a heroine of courage and deep feeling. No one has ever loved like this." He had to leave Paris again when Gustav III needed his assistance back in Sweden in preparation for the war with Russia, when Fersen took part in the military campaign. By October 1788, Fersen was sent to France to act as an intermediary between Gustav III and Louis XVI. Back in France, he divided his time between Paris and his Royal Swedish Regiment stationed at Valenciennes. In a short time, life would be turned upside down. France was entering its pre-revolutionary phase. With his acute sense of observation, Fersen was describing the atmosphere in Paris in December 1788 in a letter to his father, saying, "The fermentation of minds is general. Nothing is talked of but the Constitution. The women especially are mixed up in the matter, and you know, as I do, the influence they have in this country. It is all a delirium. Everyone is an administrator and talks of nothing but progress. A severe winter hit France that year, and Axel wrote to his father about it, saying, "The river is frozen, which hampers the provisioning of Paris, so that they fear a famine. It is also feared in the provinces. There is very little wheat, and what there is they cannot grind, because of the lack of water, for there has been no rain since August." Soon things were about to get even worse. The fall of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 triggered events with irreversible consequences. The Count of Artois left Paris, setting the tone for a wave of nobles leaving France and causing further problems for the royal family. With people deserting Paris, the king made an attempt to calm the situation by returning to the capital, but to no effect. Meanwhile, Axel, stationed at Valenciennes, was anxiously following the events, writing to his father to say, "Riots are taking place in all the cities of the kingdom, but they seem to be only a parody of what is going on in Paris." Fersen was asked to go to Versailles, where the safety of the king and queen was threatened. Many of the army officers had deserted by then, so his presence was needed there. At the beginning of October 1789, the people of Paris had one target in mind: reaching Versailles. They wanted to see the queen, and they shouted their demands. Fersen was there by the queen's side, following her everywhere to ensure her safety. The popular movement was growing, and the troops were called in to disperse the mob. With great difficulty, the crowd was eventually calmed down when the queen appeared on the balcony with Lafayette, trying to defuse the explosive situation. Shortly after that, the royal family left Versailles and went to the Tuileries in Paris. Fersen stayed with the queen, guiding and protecting her and the royal family. Towards the end of the year, he had to return to Valenciennes, where his Royal Swedish Regiment was caught up in a skirmish. At the beginning of January 1790, Axel received orders from Gustav III to go to Paris to assure King Louis of his full support. In a few weeks' time, Fersen was in Paris with the royal family. In his diplomatic role, he was acting as an intermediary between the captive King of France and Gustav III, keeping the King of Sweden informed about the situation in Paris. Fersen settled in Paris, not far from the Tuileries, to be able to offer constant support and protection to Marie Antoinette. Soon, Paris was in a state of agitation and chaos. Axel described the political uncertain situation in a letter to his father, saying, "What a frightful situation this fine kingdom is in! No force within, and no respect without. It is null in the political system of Europe. Within, it is in complete anarchy. All bonds are dissolved. There is no obedience to laws, no respect for religion, which does not exist except in name. The provinces are more in a ferment than ever, and the king is a prisoner in Paris. His position, but above all that of the queen, who feels much more keenly than he does, is dreadful." With the political situation changing rapidly by the end of that year, it was becoming clear that the king had to decide what to do next. Being loyal to the king and the queen, Fersen wrote to his father to say, "I should be vile and ungrateful if I abandon them now, when they can do nothing more for me, and while I have still the hope of being useful to them." He became their secretary and their trusted friend, who advised them and wrote letters on their behalf. He was the link between the Tuileries and the outside world. Fersen was part of a group of a few still devoted people to the king, alongside Marquis de Buy, the Lieutenant General of the King's armies, Baron de Breteuil, and Count Massy Argenteur, who was in Brussels. By March 1791, the king realized that the political situation was extremely difficult and asked Fersen for his opinion on the matter. Fersen presented his views, judging that the king had two options, saying, "One is to undertake nothing, before having formed alliances and obtained from the different powers all necessary help, in men as well as money. The other is to leave Paris, waiting only to be assured of the goodwill of the foreign powers and to obtain the necessary money to pay the troops for 2 or 3 months, by which time a loan can be made in Switzerland. After explaining the advantages and disadvantages of those options, with emphasis that the second option was dangerous and unpredictable, the king chose the second one, to leave Paris, with the intention to deliver a proclamation to the country once he reached a place of safety. By April, the plan for the royal family to escape from Paris was taking shape. The King of Sweden was determined to make it work and sent a letter to Fersen expressing his full support for such an attempt to be made. Fersen arranged for a carriage to be made for the journey. He liaised with the General de Bouille at Metz to ensure full support of his troops and place guards at different stages of the journey. He obtained passports for the royal family. He checked the planned route, and at the beginning of May he wrote to Marquis de Bouille to say, "The most essential thing is the safety of the flight. The escort should be scattered along the route. One shudders in thinking of the horrors that might happen if they were betrayed and arrested." Fersen was clearly worried and anxious about the risk involved in such a mission. The driving carriage was delivered by the beginning of June, and Fersen kept it in the courtyard of his house in Paris. He made sure it was sturdy enough for the journey, and one day he drove the 6-horse-drawn carriage at full speed through the streets of Paris. Fersen kept the Queen up to date with the developments, and the date for the flight was set. He told the Queen that he had found a way of bypassing the National Guards and getting into the Tuileries. It was a risky thing to do, but Fersen had courage, and his devotion for the Queen was boundless. Before leaving, the last things were checked, and Fersen spoke to the King and the Queen one more time. He said, "I asked what he wished to do. Both answered me that there was no hesitation. They must go on. We agreed if they were stopped, I must go to Brussels and act for them." On leaving me, the King said, "Monsieur de Fersen, whatever may happen to me, I shall never forget what you have done for me." The Queen wept much. With the date set for Monday, the 20th of June at midnight, the royal family escaped from the palace unnoticed. Fersen, dressed in the costume of a hackney coachman, drove the carriage as fast as he could, and when they reached Bondy, they separated. As early as 6 o'clock in the morning on the 22nd of June, Fersen was writing to his father saying, "The King and the whole family left Paris safely on the 20th at midnight. I drove them to the first relay. God grant that the rest of their journey may have been as fortunate. I shall continue my way along the frontier to join the King at Montmédy if he is so fortunate as to get there." Well, things were not that fortunate. During the journey, the King, who was increasingly confident about the success of the flight, got out of the carriage at some point, which led to him being recognized, and the royal family was subsequently stopped at 16 leagues from the border and taken back to Paris. In the meantime, Fersen, who was on his way to Montmédy, found out what had happened. The King had been recognized, the troops hadn't done their job properly, and the mission did not succeed. On his way to Brussels to send a letter from Louis XVI to Leopold II, the brother of Marie Antoinette, to ask him to take steps to help his sister and the King of France, Fersen wrote to his father saying, "All is lost, my dear father, and I am in despair. The King was stopped at Varennes. Judge of my grief and pity me." A few days after that, Marie Antoinette was able to send a letter to Axel saying, "I exist. How uneasy I have been about you, and how I pity you for having no news of us. Heaven grant that this letter may reach you. Do not write to me. That would only expose us. Above all, do not come here under any pretext. It is known that it was you who took us out of here. All would be lost if you appeared here. We are kept in sight day and night." King Gustav III instructed Fersen to go to Vienna to convince Emperor Leopold to take part in a coalition of the foreign powers to save Marie Antoinette and her husband. After seeing the emperor, Fersen said, "He did not ask me for the details of the king and queen leaving Paris. In fact, he talked much and listened little. On the whole, it seems to me that the thing will be long delayed and that no great warmth will be put into it." Leopold II was not enthusiastic about the plan of Gustav III to descend on Normandy to rescue Louis and restore the monarchy. Like Fersen suspected, Leopold was led by his ministers, and he would not take steps to help the King of France. When the National Assembly drafted a new constitution and Louis XVI accepted it, things got complicated even further, with the foreign powers withdrawing their support for King Louis XVI. After 2 months, the correspondence between Marie Antoinette and Axel was re-established. Before Axel left Paris, he came up with a secret way of writing letters, written in white ink, in cipher, in between the lines of meaningless correspondence, to make sure that even if the letters fell into the wrong hands, their messages would never be deciphered. He used all sorts of means to send her letters, sometimes hidden in the lining of a piece of clothing, other times in a box of biscuits. He was the link between Marie Antoinette and the leaders of Europe. He was telling her what to put in the letters and to whom they should be addressed. Living in Brussels among the French nobles who had left France, Fersen did not let himself discouraged when he became a target of malicious gossip. He wrote to Marie Antoinette saying, "They blame my conduct and say that I act from ambition only, and that I have ruined you and the king. They are right. I have had ambition, to serve you, and all my life I shall regret that I did not succeed. I wanted to show others that one can be attached to persons like you without any selfish interests." Meantime, Gustav III was still determined to rescue the royal family and came up with a new plan for them to leave France. The plan was obviously difficult to achieve. He proposed that the members of the royal family should leave separately and escape by the forests in order to reach the coast and sail to England. The King of Sweden disclosed his new plan to Fersen, who expressed his agreement to try again to rescue the royal family. He was more than happy to risk his life for that. In November, he wrote to Marie Antoinette to say that he would like to go to Paris to see them. Worried about the implications of such an incredible attempt, she refused to agree to that, but he persisted and wrote back to convince her that he would be taking all the necessary measures to ensure he would not be recognized. In January 1792, she agreed that Axel could go to Paris. He left Brussels on the 11th of February, and in 2 days' time he was in Paris. He traveled using fake names, wearing a big wig and keeping a low profile. Marie Antoinette had a tearful reunion with Axel, explaining how the royal family was arrested on that fateful day. When Fersen saw the king the following day, it became clear that he would not be successful in his attempt to convince King Louis to escape again. The king explained to Fersen what he thought about it, and he said, "I know that I am taxed with weakness and irresolution, but no one was ever in my position. I know that I missed the right moment. It was the 14th of July. I ought to have gone then, and I wished it. I lost the moment, and since then I have never found it. I have been abandoned by the world." After seeing the Queen for the last time, Fersen went back to Brussels, being convinced more than ever to renew his efforts to get the foreign powers to act and help the King of France. But soon the situation was about to get worse. At the beginning of March that year, Leopold II died suddenly, and a few weeks later Gustav III was assassinated. Fersen declared he was horror-struck. He wrote to Marie Antoinette saying, "You must already have heard the crushing news of the death of the King of Sweden. You lose in him a firm support, a good ally, and I a protector and friend. The loss is a cruel one." By June, the situation became critical in Paris, and Fersen was in shock when he heard about the attack on the Tuileries. With Austria and Prussia getting ready to launch an offensive on France, the National Assembly declared that they needed to get rid of King Louis and Marie Antoinette as they were considered supporters of those foreign powers. Extremely worried about her safety, Fersen wrote to Marie Antoinette to beg her to hide in a cellar in the Louvre, but she couldn't hide. Her last letter to him was on the 1st of August. 9 days later she was arrested and Fersen lost her forever. The king and his family had been imprisoned in the Tower of the Temple. Months passed and he was not able to get any news about the royal family, but at the end of January 1793 he heard about the king's trial and execution. Consumed by regrets, Fersen still continued to make plans to rescue the queen, but he was powerless. When he heard that Marie Antoinette would be brought before the Revolutionary Tribunal, he was absolutely crushed by the news. Fersen was just praying that one day he could see her again. Fresh attempts to save her proved futile, and on the 17th of October 1793 he received the news of her death. The only solace he found was writing to his sister about his grief, saying, "The state I am in, only you can conceive. I have lost everything in the world. She lives no longer. My cup is full to the brim, and I don't know how I am to live and bear my sorrow. All is over for me." A few months passed, and Fersen also lost his father, who died in the spring of 1794. He was unable to go back to Sweden straight away. His last mission was to go and meet the brothers of Louis XVI and deliver the last wishes of Marie Antoinette. Worried about her brother, Sophie wrote to ask how Fersen was doing, and he responded by saying, "I do not tell you of my plans. I have none. I feel incapable of making them. Her children still are a cause of anxiety to me. Their fate torments me." When Madame Royale was released from prison, Fersen rushed to Vienna to see her and offer his support and words of comfort for the ordeal she had gone through. After that, Fersen went to Sweden, where he was made Grand Marshal of Sweden once Gustav IV Adolf was proclaimed king. He had cordial relations with the new king, who was the son of Gustav III. Fersen hoped that one day he would be able to avenge the death of Marie Antoinette, but that was denied to him. In 1809, Gustav IV was forced to abdicate and Fersen became once again demoralized. The political situation in Sweden was becoming complicated. Charles XIII, the new king of Sweden, did not have any children, so he adopted Prince Christian of Holstein-Augustenburg to secure the future of the throne of Sweden. When the crown prince died suddenly in May 1810, while reviewing military troops, it was alleged that he had been poisoned by the party that wanted to impose Prince Gustav as ruler of Sweden. Fersen, siding with that political party, became the target of baseless accusations. It was rumored that both Count von Fersen and his sister Sophie were involved in the death of Prince Christian. Fersen was forewarned of a plot against him. Even King Charles XIII was aware that a revolt was brewing, but it was his chance to get rid of Count Fersen, and the king was happy with that. The king had given his tacit support for such an attempt to be made, given his dislike of Fersen, who supported Gustav, Prince of Vasa, as the future heir to the throne of Sweden. He was, after all, the grandson of Gustav III. On the 20th of June 1810, the day of the funeral of Prince Christian, Fersen took part at the funeral procession in Stockholm. He was targeted by a furious mob who attacked him under the eyes of the authorities and the army generals, who turned their backs on Fersen. His carriage, which was advancing ahead of the hearse, was attacked, and Fersen was badly hurt. The rioters dragged Fersen out of his carriage, and they started beating and kicking him. He was barely able to release himself from their hands, and he sought refuge in a cafe, but the rioters managed to break into the building. He was dragged back out into the streets, where the mob carried on their attack on Fersen. They didn't stop until they left him dead in the street. Fersen died, being entirely innocent of any wrongdoing, and the people responsible for his death were never brought to justice. An unforgettable story of love and heartbreak was the story of Axel von Fersen, a devoted knight who tried to save the woman he loved, who happened to be the Queen of France. His greatest happiness would have been to die for Marie Antoinette in order to rescue her, but that happiness was ultimately refused to him.